study partners. So these are organizations that actually give us direct access into their data so that we can not just have organizational provided data, but we can go in there and really do some analysis. So it's probably a big ask for many of them, so we appreciate it. And then just a note as we get in here about how to read these charts. So as you can see there, there's a whole like threshold, which is the line, and then a green circle. And so that's actually just the median of the value, if that makes sense. And that whole range line is the normal values for whatever segment we're looking at. So you'll see that throughout, and I like to start with a what it means first, just in case there's any questions there. So let's get going. Like I said, much of this is going to be about online fundraising, but some of it is also about all the rest of our communications and our list, just to give you more context for what those fundraising specific data points really mean. So first, let's start with email list growth. And email list size for the study participants grew 15% from 2011 into 2012, with small groups growing the fastest. They were at 35% growth, which was, really exceeded 2011. And while the overall increase was pretty stable, there's really a wide range of growth rates between sectors, which is along the bottom there. And health and wildlife and animal welfare groups saw a particularly large jump from last year.
Do you know any reasons why that, Amy, do you know any reasons why that jump might occur? Has there been anything in the data that
Yeah.
suggests that?
Yeah, I mean, and we'll see this throughout. A couple years ago, some of the largest growth areas were in the international sector, and that was because we had international natural disasters, and there was huge, online and mobile fundraising in response to those natural disasters. So, from the year before to the year of say a tsunami in Japan, there was, it looked like 150% growth or something really large, but that was because all of a sudden there was something the whole world was responding to, and it happened to be an international crisis. So each year there are things like that that really affect certain sectors more than others, and we'll be able to highlight some of those specific areas where it's impacted, especially environment and wildlife and animal welfare.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Not all email messages are created equal, though, and they certainly don't perform equally. So here, we've broken out primary types of email messages to see differences, and you'll see this throughout. So the numbers in this chart in parentheses represent change in rate since 2011, and open rates were very similar between different types of messages and about the same rate as 2011. However, subscribers who open messages at about the same rate in 2011, they are actually less likely to click on a link in those messages that they opened. So click-through rates dropped sharply, especially for fundraising messages, where they dropped 27%. So that's a really big change. So, again, you can't, when you're evaluating your campaigns, especially email campaigns, you can't just look at that open rate, because that's still going up, but the click-through rate, meaning they read it and wanted to do something about it, is crucial.
Right.
And the supporters who did click through, they actually maintained a relatively stable level of page completion, so like actually doing whatever they clicked through to do, but that's not true across every single sector. So the exceptions there on that page completion were environment and wildlife and animal welfare, which actually saw noticeable declines in fundraising completion. So again, even though that list growth maybe went up, they're having fewer people complete those fundraising pages.
Yeah, which means obviously less donations per se.
Exactly. So moving to open rates, These were at approximately the same levels in 2011, but there's a 14% overall open rate. And the differences in open rates from the year before or between the different types of messages are pretty negligible. Email list churn, though, which is down here, and let me know if the slides aren't advancing when I'm talking. So email list churn, which is the percentage of names on an email list that become unreachable over the course of the year. So like not emails that are responding or maybe doesn't even go through. That churn was the highest for small groups and for those in environment and rights. So we didn't find any correlation between list growth and churn. Organizations with faster list growth did not appear to have higher churn, but there was a weak correlation between messaging volume and churn. So organizations that sent more messages experienced slightly higher churn.
Gotcha.
So now for the click-throughs, like we said before, that's really maybe more of an indicator because they may open it, but what are they clicking through? So for advocacy messages, the click-through rates exhibit a pretty wide spread between sectors. And again, those lines are the normal range, and then the dots are the median. So environmental groups experienced a 5.5 click-through rate for advocacy messages, which is nearly 3 times as high as the 2.1 that international groups have. But it's not the first time we've seen environmental groups score the highest for advocacy click-throughs and response rates in this study. The list composition may play a role. So the kind of person who signs up for an environmental group's email list may just personally be more likely to be interested in online activism than the type of person that signs up for an international organization.
And Amy, I have a question for you around this advocacy, and this is also just came in too. Can you describe what constitutes an email that represents advocacy? Maybe just give us some examples of emails in that category.
Yeah. So advocacy are things like, the thing I always think about first is like National Wildlife Federation, sends out that email that says, wolves are in danger, this is what's going on with wolves in your state, and, click here to sign the petition, or click here to learn more about wolves, or whatever. That's advocacy. Gotcha. And obviously that's like a wildlife example, but I think does that make it clear? So it's not asking for money, it's not asking for whatever, it's just like, you have to learn, you have to be passionate, you have to sign this petition.
Gotcha. Thank you. Yeah, that helps. Thank you.
Yeah, and so to your question earlier about what's really going on, maybe especially for environmental groups this year that's making those things high, and I had said before, international groups saw a higher response rate when there were international natural disasters. Well, this year we have something that I'm imagining people have heard of in the news called the Keystone XL. Mm-hmm. So a really high-profile fight, is going to naturally drive media coverage and make it more likely that supporters of any organization in that whole sector are paying attention to the topic, because now it's in the news and other people are talking about it. And so then as organizations, start including messaging around that key political issue, it gets even more attention, and it just kind of grows on itself. So that's something that's particular to the environmental group, but also we've seen, wildlife and animal welfare organizations talking about Keystone. So really big advocacy point for those two groups.
Sure. Yeah, and we've talked about that with this audience too before, about coupling messaging with relevant topics, even if it's awareness months or anything else, something that you can latch onto to hopefully drive participation with an email. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Anything in the news that you can tie back to. So now for the click-through rates for fundraising emails. And these, again, that would be actually asking for money in the email, talking about fundraising campaigns, getting people to sign up a friend to fundraise, whatever. So the drop in fundraising message click-through rates was actually not very evenly distributed across sectors. What appears kind of at first glance here to be an industry-wide drop, fundraising message click-through did drop overall by 27%, but it was actually instead driven largely by organizations from two specific sectors that saw the big declines. The fundraising click-through rate for international groups dropped by 40% and rights groups by 38%. So in addition, fundraising message click-through rate for health groups declined by 10, which is still fairly significant. And for wildlife and animal welfare groups, it only dropped by 3%. So definitely, not an across-the-board consistent drop, but we also have that reference of like a few years ago, there was major online fundraising around international disasters and not as much now. So there's going to have to be a decline, but it's not necessarily like going into the negative. It's just going back maybe to a norm for that sector.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting, and you look at this data here with fundraising rates, I mean, and this is not probably what you were able to get in hard numbers, but is there this sense that it's a crowded space? I mean, we haven't probably lessened the amount of messaging around raising money, and so probably the amount of interest in different types of campaigns probably contribute a little bit to this as growth in email usage has increased over time.
Right. I mean, there are a few different thoughts on this. So first, divergent trends in those click-through rates between sectors suggest the response rate decline may actually just be due to changes in the audience, like those people not having an interest in that particular campaign this year versus the year before, or even a sign that some of those people may be responding less to email and more to another channel.